Howdy, folks. This is Big Sam. Step right up and hedge your bets, because we got another interesting one for you today. We've got a mystery Mosin Nagant carbine stock. Go ahead and guess what this is, and in a little later we'll see if you got it right. This one is interesting, folks. So at first glance, this might appear to be some sort of a carbine stock, right? You'd be right if you guessed that. The way we can tell is that there's a really small distance between the two barrel band retainer springs, these two springs here. Really small distance. Whenever you see that, you already know you're looking at a carbine stock. To give you an example of what a 9130 stock would look like, I've got this guy. And as you can see here, much bigger gap in between these two springs, right? Now, sometimes it can be sort of hard to judge maybe how long the stock is. Maybe it's an angle or the picture's bad. If that's the case, just look at that distance. If there's a small distance between these springs, you know it's a carbine stock. If you get a big old gap here, you know it's a rifle, full-length rifle stock. Okay, so we know we got a carbine stock. So what sort of carbine stock do we have here? Well, right, we could be a couple things. Now, the most likely scenario when looking at something like this is going to be an M44 stock. Okay? If you just look at probability and statistics of quantities of the stocks that are out there, the large majority of them are going to be M44 stocks. Now, the M44 is going to be something like this carbine with this folding bayonet, okay? Now, the way to tell if this is in fact an M44 stock is what you're going to do, you're going to look for a cutout here on the side, and it's actually, it's a cutout or an inlet, depending on how you want to look at it, in the wood here, because that folding bayonet has to sort of sit inside the wood. So it has to have a little bit of a cutout. We do not see any such cutout here, okay? Now, on this guy, this is a Chinese Type 53 stock, which is basically just an M44 stock. And you can see here we have this cutout or this inlet on the side. It's very distinct. You can see that plain as day. That's where the bayonet folds in right here. But we don't see that on our mystery stock. So what does that mean? Well, that could tell us then, well, first of all, we know that this did not go on a rifle with a folding bayonet. So that means that this is an M38 stock, right? Well, maybe. Let's take a closer look at exactly what we have here. Starting at the butt plate, we can see, looks like our typical Ijevsk factory marking. Kind of hard to see the arrow, but it's within a triangle there. And then we have our Mosin Nagant serial number with our two-letter code Cyrillic prefix. So we know that this was made before, or excuse me, during or after 1938. Okay, well that doesn't really give us a whole lot to go off of here. Now we look at these escutcheons, we can see we have the really distinct wartime pattern where with no metal escutcheons, just a cutout in the wood. Really simple. All right. Further down, here's our recoil lug. Kind of an interesting repair there. I really like looking at stock repairs. They really fascinate me. But then again, I'm kind of weird. Okay. Coming up here, here's our, again, wartime pattern. Really crude front sling escutcheon. It's just this little piece of folded metal that sits in there. We would see the same thing on Ijevsk pattern 9130 rifles produced during the early and middle stages of World War II. And even up until the late stages, we would see this happen. Looks like we've got our Type 2 pattern barrel band spring. So again, another wartime feature. And looks like we've got a wartime stock end cap here. This was a stamped piece, this end cap right here. So a lot of wartime looking features. So this definitely looks like an M38 stock, But there's one slight problem. And in order to show you that problem, I've procured an M38 stock right here. So what's the difference between these two stocks? Our mystery stock up here and our M38 stock. Well, what we want to do is look on the inside, because there's something on the inside that's really going to tell us everything we need to know. We want to look in this area right here. Let's turn both of these guys over and get them side by side here. In this area right here. Okay, especially right here. M38 and M44 patterns of carbines have an interesting rear sight. And that rear sight requires a cutout, an additional cutout inside the stock, because the rear sight base is sort of this deal that wraps fully around the barrel. You don't see that on 9130 pattern of rifles. Now, if we look on this stock, there's no inlet. I mean, you can both see it and I can feel it with my finger here. This has a very distinct inlet. This has no inlet. So an M38 or an M44 pattern of rifle won't even fit in this stock. Okay, now let's go back to our M44 again to help show this. Let's look at the rear sight on this guy, on the M44. So this sight base, see, this whole thing wraps all the way around the underside of the barrel. Okay, 9130s don't have that. So what does that tell us then? Well, basically what that tells us is this has to be for a 9130 carbine. The Russians didn't actually really produce 9130 carbines, though. So is this a fake? What did someone just cut down this stock? What is this? Actually, no. This is for a very specific pattern of Mosin Nagant, one that you may or may not have heard of before. This is not an M38 or an M44 stock. This is actually a stock for this gun, a 9159 rifle. Now, this is a really simple gun. All this is a 9130 rifle that's been cut down to an M38 carbine length, but retains the original 9130 style rear sight base. Now, if we look here, we can see there's no sight base that wraps on the underside of the barrel. You can see on this one, it's actually funny because it's in an M44's pattern of stock. And you can actually see the cutout in the stock for that sight base, even though this gun doesn't require it. And you can also see the cutout here for the folding bayonet. These guns don't have folding bayonets. This is actually, technically, this stock is for a 9138 carbine, but, well, we're not really talking about those here today. But we know that this one is not for one of those because 9138 carbines, again, have that M44 style rear sight base. So this is a 9159 stock. So who made this? Well, that's a really good question. One of the really interesting things I want to look at is, again, these escutcheons. Let's again compare this stock to our M38 carbine stock. Now, here's our M38 carbine stock. This has a really typical Ijev's pattern of cutout in the back. Our 9159 stock, it's not quite as wide. It's very strangely shaped, and it's not quite as wide. Now, if we look at the front here, we compare these, this escutcheon is actually, or the cutout really, is not even nearly as tall as this one. So it seems like this one's going to get you a tighter fit. Now, this is very unusual, actually. This holes, both of these holes, in fact. The Russian holes in stocks can vary somewhat, but generally they're not going to look like these. These are just sort of out of the norm for Russian 9130 or M38 pattern of escutcheon holes and hole sizes. So already off the gate, that's weird. Now, if we look here at the very back, I guess some people call this the comb of the stock at the back here on the top. You see these couple interesting arsenal markings and like some squares. These I believe to be Bulgarian arsenal markings. Okay, and that makes sense because it is commonly held that Bulgaria produced 9159 rifles, or carbines, however you want to call them. So combine all the evidence together, and it really does appear that this is in fact a 9159 stock. And that's pretty cool because real legitimate 9159 stocks are kind of hard to come by. You don't really see them come up for sale that often. And usually when you do, people don't necessarily even know what they are. I mean, it's so easy to mistake this for an M44 pattern of stock. The other thing is the 9159s are nice because they're backwards compatible. Generally, they should fit, as you just saw earlier, in M44 style of stocks. So if you need a stock for a 9159 rifle, an M44 pattern will do the job. Now, this particular one is pretty weird because an M44 will not fit in this stock, again, because it doesn't have this cutout. So really the only pattern of gun that meets this criteria, I mean, you could fit a 9130 rifle in here, but it would look crazy because the barrel would be coming out to like here. It almost looked kind of sporterized, but you could do it, and nobody would be stopping you. But really, this would be the proper stock for a 9159 rifle. But again, a normal carbine isn't going to fit in this stock. Really fascinating stuff, folks. I'm glad to bring some cool Bulgarian stuff to you. We got some more Bulgarian stuff coming soon that we'll be taking a look at. Maybe we can compare to this one as well. But something a little bit out of the norm. So if y'all, whoever guessed 9159 stock, you get 2 thumbs up from Big Sam because you are correct, and I probably wouldn't have even guessed that initially either. Sometimes we like to trick y'all. So I appreciate y'all watching. I hope you enjoyed getting to look at some cool Mosin stuff, doing some interesting comparisons of the carbine models. We'll be doing more of this in the future. If you like more Mosin content like this, please consider subscribing. Let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.